Hey everybody, hope you're doing well. Today I'm going to be sharing with you the real-time process that I created my owl portrait in. Clip Studio will be the initial program that I use where I start out my grayscale painting and I follow it up with a render over top of that in grayscale in Photoshop, kind of equalizing my values and softening things a bit. And then I drop in some colors, do a lot of adjustments, and I'll just generally talk about my approach here as well as offshoots on other things that I've been up to. So let's get into it. I'm going to jump over to the video and we'll get started talking over. All right. So first things first, I have my watercolor brush that I use in Clip Studio. This is the brush that I used primarily when doing my final line drawings for my not older, but the stuff within the past like year, and also my final renders after laying in colors. I had an idea while I was working on my grayscale Photoshop stuff where I was thinking like my drawings, or at least my paintings in grayscale in Photoshop, weren't really coming out the way I wanted. I didn't feel like I had that control that I was looking for, and I wasn't as fast. I ended up doing a thing where I would just have everything drawn on a piece of paper, and then I would take a photo of that, and I would use that photo in Photoshop to paint on top of. So I had at least a base that I liked that was drawn and felt a little sharper. So as much as I like everything that I've found in Photoshop as far as the brushes are concerned, where I'm getting a lot out of my paintings and renderings and things, I feel like the textures are nice. The amount of control, and I've talked about this a million times in the past about Clip, the amount of control that I feel I get when specifically using this watercolor brush is a lot different than what I get in Photoshop. I get way more accuracy. I can go really fine with my detail while also doing very broad strokes. I cover a whole range of kind of gestural brush strokes and in this degree of accuracy that is just kind of like unmatched in Photoshop. So that's why starting my stuff in grayscale in Clip is better for me, I think, because the difference is that I used to do the drawings and things in Clip and the final painting in Clip, and I would always think after those are done, I'm like, I really don't like the way Clip Studio processes color. It feels too literal. Like it doesn't have much. I mean, you can change it to have some color jitter and things, but I always had this weird kind of plastic feel at the end of the work, and I just felt like I wasn't really getting enough texture across. There would be texture and it would feel kind of traditional-ish, but it wasn't really what I was looking for. And I found that in this approach, if I just get rid of working in color in Clip, and I instead work in grayscale first, because I love the control. I love drawing and painting in Clip. I think it's so much fun. And I just felt like I could probably do a whole lot of the footwork in the beginning in Clip because I'm so much faster in this program. And then rough out all of the problems I had with Clip previously in Photoshop. So because Clip is the base, I can then hop over into Photoshop and do all the textural things I like and color the whole thing in there and get all the nice subtle hue shifts and the very intricate control that you get over color in Photoshop. I'd have all those adjustment layers and things to play with. And that was kind of the starting point for me being like, oh, that makes sense. So let's jump into Clip and see if I can actually make that work. The other problem I had with Clip was that a lot of the textural things that came across from this specific brush that I love so much, they would come off as too sharp in the final paintings. And I found that was an issue where I would always be painting out that sharpness. But working this way, where I start out with a grayscale painting in Clip, I can kind of just do whatever. You know, it's the same way that like a lot of my sketches in my sketchbook are super loose and there's lines everywhere. But it doesn't really matter because all the information's there. I can just paint on top of that loose sketch and then find what I'm, looking for my final image, because at least the framework for it is in place. I just need to paint over top of it. And I just was thinking like the way that I usually integrate my pencils is I'll kind of get them lost in the process and blended. Like, let me frame that in a better way. When I do watercolor, I at least in the beginning when I first started doing watercolor, I would always see my pencil lines down that I did my initial drawing with to get my, base there so that I could paint. And I always think like, oh, those pencil lines are really sharp. I wonder how that's going to look when I start adding watercolor. Maybe those lines are too definite. Maybe that's a problem where it's going to show through too much. But the more I painted on top of those lines, the more that pencil just kind of like blended a little bit into the paper. It softened it. So in a similar way, that's what I'm doing here. Where like I'll do this whole base in Clip and then bring it over into Photoshop and then just soften it. Just go over it a little bit. It doesn't need a whole lot to lose the textural things that I'm not a huge fan of from this brush. But the plus side of using the brush that I use in Clip, it just so outweighs any negative that I kind of see it as like a, at this point, after doing a few different a few different tests with this process, I'm like, oh, this is a no-brainer for the future. Like, I'm going to continue on doing this because I'm flying through work right now. So, yeah, that's the idea, is to take the best of kind of everything that I've learned over the past couple of years and combine them all. I always try to challenge myself to try new things that are outside my comfort zone, just so that I'm constantly carving new neural pathways in my brain, so I'm not getting lazy and forming bad habits. But I also I'm able to identify my strengths. My strengths in my work is lighting and the way that I see value. I find that that's like the thing I probably get the most comments about is the strength of the lighting. So grayscale really helps me lean on that a lot. And the only thing that was kind of missing from my whole process was I felt like let's just go into an example that was just recent. So I was trying to work in just straight color for a long time, and it's not like I'll never do that again. Of course I'll do that again, because I always do that stuff. Just change styles, change approaches, whatever. But I found that I was too beholden to my line work, and I find that when I work in grayscale like this, I don't mind just kind of losing entire chunks of like a character. Like, I'll just paint out entire areas because who cares? There's not like 15 different parts of the image that all have colors that I need to manage. It doesn't have gold chainmail on top of a green cloak on top of this green fur or red fur, you know what I mean? So it's like when you're painting all those things out, it can become just like a muddy mess and you have to redo all the colors and everything. But when everything's grayscale and it's just forms, I can just play in that space for a longer time and make sure that the actual drawing and the foundation is solid, rather than being like, oh, I did that line drawing, so I want to make sure that line drawing comes through in the final. I don't want to lose it, so I'm not going to do too many drastic changes to this image and fix things that might be wrong, which I felt like I kept doing. So the example I was going to talk about was the Gundam piece that I did. And when I worked on that, I found I really liked the actual the actual like suit in the background. Like I was happy with how like the red comet came out, that Zaku. I really liked that. I felt that's just because the drawing was pretty solid. And then when it came to something like Char had so many issues where he wouldn't have had so many issues if I had just done something like I'm doing here, where I'm solving for those issues just in the painting process like this. I'm just working out the forms. Like even looking at this image right now, because I'm jumping right into this painting process with a loose base sketch below, I can just move things around. Like I can, like you'll see me take that owl's eye and move it in closer and fix that weird distance that it has right now. But I mean, I wouldn't do that during those paintings like the Char one, because I was so worried about balancing the colors that I had already laid down, and I didn't want to have to like paint and repaint and redraw. And because in Photoshop I felt like I didn't have as much control over the way the brush worked on the canvas, like I didn't have that super sharp line, I didn't have this really intuitive drawing ability in the program. I felt like because of that, I didn't correct enough of what was wrong clearly in the image. And I'm noticing that now with the Chrono Trigger piece that I've been working on. I just started working on Magus in the background, and Magus I'm doing in this style, so just fully grayscale painted and then colors after the fact. And I took like, I had a head drawn of Magus from Photoshop, and as soon as I brought it over into Clip and I started redrawing the face to make it closer to kind of what I had in my head, it just instantly came together. And I always kind of get mad at myself a bit for these sorts of things. Like I'll find something that clearly works for me, and then I'll throw it away just because I'm like, there's got to be something better. And I do that over and over and over again just because I'm always looking for something. I find that the ultimate result of that is good, but the things in the process that I lose along the way kind of suffer. But I think I've solved for everything that I didn't really care for in Clip, and we'll see how I feel about that going forward. But for now, I'm super happy with it, and I felt like these past couple days that I've been doing this, like I did 2 alien guys, each one took me around 20 minutes, and then this took me about an hour. And I think that like that difference in speed for me is so dramatic that I'm just going to continue on working like this. I mean, I don't see a downside to it so far. If I find it and it's something that stands out to me as like, ooh, this is a major shortcoming that I should probably address, then yes. But I think for the most part, this just kind of reminds me of the underpaintings I see in a lot of traditional artwork that people do. And I don't do a whole lot of traditional work. I don't really work in like oils and things, but I know tons of people who do. And it kind of just feels like that's all I'm doing with this approach. It's basically that. So, I'm not too worried about it. I think it's a solid way of going about it. I really like the way the Clip Studio brushes come through in the final piece, because it isn't that like crazy sharpness that I always ended up with in my, like if you look at my Evangelion pieces, they're too plasticky. Like it works on the actual Evas, but it doesn't work on the characters as much. It works on like textures, like on the characters' suits it works, but on their faces it doesn't work. So what I needed to do if I were to go back in time, I would render those characters up completely in grayscale in the way I'm showing you here, and including the face and everything. And then when I brought it into Photoshop, I would do all of that softening and the rendering that I would have needed to do on like the faces to make them work too. So I think for all the strengths that Clip has in the traditional kind of texture look of a brush like this, the one that I'm using here, I think that Photoshop balances that out with a lot of the like softer, more realistic, like photoreal kind of brush textures and things that I wasn't really getting from Clip. Because Clip is, for me anyway, I always lean more towards the graphic, the literal line work, literal pencil, and then like the paintbrush strokes, and ink wash stuff looks like ink wash stuff. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm at right now with it, and that's the critique that I've had, looking back at some of the older stuff that I've been doing. I mean, like even right now, seeing how quickly I came to this result here, it's been about less than 15 minutes into this. So I mean, it's like night and day. It feels like such a relief too, because I just feel like I've had so little time to invest into paintings recently. More in the way that like I can't sit down and just do them straight through. I have a handful of things that I'm wrapping up that are just outstanding projects that have been around for a while. And I mean outstanding in the way that they're not done yet. And I just like needed this boost. I needed this approach to help get me through all of that stuff. And like I sat down after doing the few things I talked about, this portrait and the two other ones, and I started working on those things, and I just was like, holy shit, the amount of time I'm saving right now. And it feels good. It's the thing I can't shake. I tried to find it so much in Photoshop, and I have found it to a pretty decent extent, but nothing touches that Clip Studio feel for me still, which is a bummer, because it's like, really, there's nothing in Photoshop that feels like this? And the more I look, it's just I've looked everywhere. I've downloaded tons of brushes from people I really like their work, and I find that as much as I really enjoy everything that they do, I don't think like those people. Like, if you see my stuff, you know how detail oriented I can be, and Clip Studio allows me to be insane with detail, which is what I need. And then bringing it over into Photoshop allows me to soften all of that, because it can be overkill, and it can draw, like when everything's sharp in a painting, your eye is drawn to all of those sharp places. So you're not really balancing things out if you don't kind of lose some of that sharpness, so that the focal areas are the sharpest parts or whatever. And using Photoshop is like the way that I kind of work around that now. But yeah, I tried really hard to find something that touched the way this felt, what you're seeing right now, but did not find it. It might just be my own sensibilities for like brush work. Like I really like working in ink washes and painting that way. And I really like the way watercolor feels and the way a brush bleeds onto a page. So that's kind of what's so alluring about this Clip Studio brush engine, specifically with this brush. And yeah, I just find that I guess I'll just need to use both programs going forward, which is great that I found more of a use of Photoshop, because before this I wasn't doing that much. Photoshop I just used for adjustments and blocking in colors. Now I use Photoshop for a lot more, because I'm trying to get that kind of traditional look without it being plasticky. So now that I have the two of them working together, I find that result is coming together much more smoothly. The result that I really want. So yeah, that's where I'm at right now. You can see here, I'm working on a pretty big screen. I'm working on a 4K screen when I'm doing these paintings. So this actual image, it's kind of big on the screen for me, but it's not huge. I tend to work at like a pretty realistic size. So I would say, like, if you're looking at my face right here on the camera, it's like this big compared to my face, like top to bottom right now. It's a pretty small owl on the screen here. Like I'm not painting this huge image. I like to work small so I can actually see all the detail, because if I zoom in too quick, especially at the early stage when I'm building out the image, then I tend to focus too much on little tiny details. So that's why I'm so zoomed out right now. I don't want to be laser focused just on the beak. You know, you can do that, and that can come later as I go through the process, but I feel that I feel that at this stage, you can get too lost in the weeds and start to just focus too much on the little tiny things before the whole image is realized. Like, you want to block out most of what you're doing first so that when you get into those little details, you're working on top of an existing form that already reads well. You know, like, you can get away with a lot of detail if it lives within a form that reads nice. There's like a shape, some silhouette. Again, back with the G Fuel. They're not sponsoring me, but they did send a mini fridge in the mail, just got shipped. And yeah, I'm working through about 600 servings of G Fuel that they've sent me. And so far, so good, actually. I wanted to make fun of it. I wanted to make fun of it the same way I'd make fun of like a gamer chair. Because, you know, it's like, at least in my mind, it's embarrassing. But I can't deny that it's pretty good. I still want to make fun of myself, though, so I'll continue to do that. I have some pretty cool stuff from them. Here, you can watch this video for a second without me. I'm going to grab the box that they sent me. Yeah, so check this out. I did a project with them, and I got to do the Super Meat Boy special box, and they just sent it to me. It was pretty great to work on this project. So you can see I painted kind of every part of it. It was a really fun process because they gave me the layout of the whole box, and they were like, here you go, do whatever you want. And so I was like, what if I just did the entire box and made the whole thing part of the product? And then they went for that, and it was really cool. And they just sent it to me not too long ago. It's so nice to see your stuff come into the real world like this when you finish a project. And then you get to hold it in your hands and be like, oh, cool. It makes it feel real. That's my favorite part of anything. Like I've showed you before, I have this guy right here, which is the spider suit that I designed for Insomniac's Miles Morales Spider-Man. And I finally got a PS5. My wife was on one of those alert me things where they tell you when something's in stock. And they sent over, well, we bought it and then we got sent over the PS5. So I downloaded that game and I just flew around New York City in my spider suit. And I was like, what a weird thing. It's so cool. It's so strange to be asked for something like that. To be asked to just like design a spider suit. They didn't really ask me to change anything. Like, they just made exactly what I did without like hardly any revisions. It's so cool. I feel like I'm at a really weird part of my career where things like that are happening more and more. And it's just like right now I've been working on a video game for 8 months. About 8 months, I think. And I've been the lead kind of artist directing the whole, basically like vision of the game, like the whole style, and developing that over the course of just months has been so rewarding and cool, and it's just great to do. And I find that after working in this industry for 17 years, that all of these strange like doors are opening, and I don't know, it's really nice. It's really nice to just like see a lot of this stuff happening and just get to kind of be excited about the process and the projects and get super involved and have more of a role in everything. It's been nice. I can't wait for you to see some of the things that are coming down the pipe. I have a few things that I'm going to share long processes about, but I'm waiting for the reveals on like a couple of them, because as soon as that happens, then that's going to be pretty cool. Pretty cool to share, pretty cool to talk about, and I can walk through process and all. It's going to be similar to like the giant Castlevania painting. Like I've done, like the the curse of doing an image like that, and images like that in general, is that everybody's just asked you to do giant montage paintings from that point on. So that's kind of what's happened since then. It's just a bunch of people being like, hey, could you paint every character in this thing now? And I'm like, God, that's who I've made myself. All of a sudden, it's gonna be a problem. But no, yeah, it's been a wild time. But thankfully, due to this process, I'm starting to actually blow through some of my deadlines, which is so nice. Oh, what a wonderful thing. And at the moment, that it means a lot, because I got COVID, and then my wife and my kids got COVID, and now everybody has a cough. Which, by the way, if suddenly I pause this and then I come back, it's because I had to go help my wife or my kids, because I'm pretty much the only one who's through everything at the moment. So my wife has some kind of influenza, so she's up coughing upstairs, and I went to the store and got her humidifier just before this, because our kids are using both of the other ones, and we're all just kind of loaded up, and she's on all kinds of medicine and things, and it's just been a wild time. So I'm extra grateful for finding things like this, because it means that I don't have to spend as much time stressing about any kind of work related deadlines or things, because it's been a couple weeks that I really haven't been able to do a whole bunch of work. And yeah, speeding things along and figuring out new ways to kind of cover more ground, it's so helpful. And every time I find those sorts of things, I feel such a wave of relief hit me. I don't know why. Maybe you can relate to this, but whenever I use Photoshop, I always find that I don't have the same amount of control that I do in comparison to like a pencil. And Clip definitely has that level of control. But even when I felt like I was doing pretty well in Photoshop, I was never doing like this well. Like you can see on this guy here. I was never doing that well, which is a bummer. But whatever. I mean, you can't complain about a good thing. I just always wish I could go back in time and redo a bunch of stuff. Like, you should see the thing that I just did for Wizards. I did a thing for Wizards of the Coast that's so stupidly huge. I mean, I can't wait. I don't know when it's gonna come out. Hopefully soon, but if I could go back in time and work that thing up like this, oh my God, that would have saved me weeks probably. It's the kind of job where I got hired, I think, a year ago, and I didn't really even finish it until December. Not because I worked on it the whole time, but just like they gave me a huge deadline, and it was just like on and off. I worked on this thing. But yeah, you'll see it when it comes out. I have a few things like that I was like dreading doing, and I just would like I'd go into them like, oh fuck, here it goes. I'm gonna try and make this happen. Okay, so I just finished the grayscale in Clip, and now I opened up Photoshop. I make a new layer on top of my Clip layer where the painting was, and I will just use the eyedropper tool with that hard round kind of blender brush, and I just select values and I begin painting things out. So mostly what I'm doing is kind of reinforcing kind of drop shadows and things, and I'll be using the eyedropper to like select around areas that I feel are too sharp, and I mean too sharp as in like the brush stroke looks too hard, it looks too unrealistic, or just kind of goes contrary to what I'm trying to do with the style, I'll paint out those lines. So you can see that I'm just kind of softening things up, adding a bit more subtlety in the values. That's really all I'm doing here. I'm just trying to kind of give it a bit more depth, lose some of that texture, make it feel a bit more real, reinforce some of the lighting, and just kind of play with the overall style with the balance of soft edge versus hard edge. But yeah, that's kind of what this is going to be for a little bit. So you can see that I just select around and then paint and just try to get my values working. And I like to put it on a new layer just in case there's things that I don't like. But yeah, let's watch this come together. Because I gotta watch it back like I'm a football coach, figuring out what went wrong, just studying tapes, just watching tapes all day. What did I do? Where did I falter? It's nice to have these. It really is. I miss doing these recordings. I was doing these all the time, and then I just felt like I just had no time for like a couple months to really go nuts with this sort of thing. What I'm doing right now is almost done too, so it's been pretty good. And I don't have a million things to do. I just have my day job where I work on a video game, and then I do Patreon stuff in between, or sometimes I'll ask the day job for like a day off here and there so that I can work on the Patreon, and that'll be nice when I get those days. It's all very enjoyable and just kind of stress-free. I have one deadline that's in 6 days, and then I have another deadline that is in 15 days. And I just got to hit those and I'll be good. Right now, I went from using the hard round brush to using my general painter brush, which is that kind of block chalky paintbrush. If you've ever downloaded my brushes before, I use that one for getting that kind of traditional looking texture. It has a bit of a noise to it, and I find it's really nice for blending. So if I'm going for very detailed areas, I tend to use that brush. If I'm going for like general lighting and reinforcing shapes and things and creating volume, I'll use something like the hard round brush that's just like a basic renderer, or like a soft round brush. But I like to use this brush when I'm kind of going a little bit sharper with the detail without going super sharp. It's still soft, but it's more defined than the hard round brushes are. Yeah, so I'm just painting in those forms using that brush. And man, I'm so happy. I'm so happy with how fast this stuff's coming together. This is great. I can't wait to just keep doing these and see where I can go. As soon as I started doing these, I got so excited to paint. I was like, fuck, there's so many things I could do now. So many things that I was like wanting to do, but I felt like I didn't have time for. Now I'm like, well, it's kind of the curse of me, really, is that I'm always like, oh, I'm free. Let's take on 50 things. Because I think at my core, I'm a workaholic, which is a problem. But yeah, I love that I have this speed now. So I'm just like, oh, now jobs that were going to take me a week and a half will take me 5 days or 4 days or something. It's wild. I think I just switched over. Yeah, I switched over to my more painterly brush in Photoshop. I forget what I call it. I call it like a sketcher brush. Hold on, let me pause this and I'll tell you. Let's pause this owl video and pause the recording. Okay, I called it the painterly line brush. So the painterly line brush I like to use for like a textural kind of blender. It has a nice brush stroke quality to it, so it adds a bit of that traditional feel that I like to get into my stuff. Usually what I do, like on this character, it doesn't really matter that much because there's a lot of hair and not hair, there's a lot of feather, and that kind of texture needs to come through of the feathers. So this painterly brush feels like feathery, so I don't mind just using that textural look when painting something like this. But if I'm doing skin tones, I'll blend using that brush because I like the way that it feels. And then after I blend using that brush, I'll usually go over it with that general painter brush, or I'll go over it with the hard round blender brush. And that kind of helps me to bring the texture down a little bit to make it feel like either a skin or, some other kind of softer texture. But the blending ability of that brush, it feels really nice, so I tend to lean on it. Yeah, so you see I zoom way out for a lot of things just to kind of make sure that everything's reading correctly and that it looks good. So I'll do that a lot. But yeah, this is just going to be me reinforcing shadows, reinforcing the overall shapes of the face and the forms, and making sure that it's reading correctly anatomically. I don't use really any reference for this sort of thing. Maybe it shows. I think that I could do better work if I were using reference for this, but just for the sake of doing a demo, I wanted to kind of show you how I just do it from my head, how I usually work up a concept. But for something that's going to be like a final painting for a client, I might go in and gather a bunch of stuff just to make sure that it's right. Like I'll look at a bunch of beaks, I'll look at a bunch of feathers, and I won't change how this looks. Like I would get it to this place that you're seeing right now before getting reference. But after I got reference, in this stage, I would go over it again in the grayscale and just kind of correct and make sure that things that it could be better were better. Yeah. Yeah, I'm pretty happy with it though. For something that's pretty quick, I think it looks cool. And I'm really excited to do more. I have a bunch of ideas for this. A whole bunch that I'm just waiting to get started on. As soon as I knock out that Chrono Trigger piece, I have a bunch of things in mind that I would like to do now that I'm feeling more confident. Because I was feeling fairly stressed about what I was doing previously. Feeling slightly trapped. Because that can happen, you get into a mode of doing something a certain way and it just doesn't, it still feels like it's a little too slow for what you know you're capable of, or, something's holding you back. You don't know what it is. Tools make a big difference to me. And, you can say the thing of like brushes don't matter and that sort of thing. I think brushes absolutely matter as far as an extension of a style that you're trying to get across. The wrong brush can make you think differently. There's a psychology to that, where even in the way of like different colored pens, when you write with them in a legal pad, you're just taking down notes. Different color pens make you think differently. And you'll have different ideas depending on the color that you're working with. It's really interesting. Like, you can say that brushes don't matter, and maybe they don't matter on a technical level, because you could do whatever with anything, but they matter at the very kind of like detail phase of a thing. When you're getting into detail on an idea, then that's when it starts to matter. When you're getting into the nuance of style, and just kind of like a language of drawing, then brushes do matter quite a bit, because I think differently when I do watercolor versus when I ink, versus when I use pencil, and versus when I use clip, or versus Photoshop. Like each one of those separate things, it makes me think differently about what I'm doing. It's like, yes, technically I could do this in Photoshop from scratch. It would take way longer though, because it's not like, for as much as people say brushes don't matter, it's not like Photoshop is this perfect, wholly realized program that has all of your needs met. And you should be like, well, if it doesn't work in Photoshop, then it works nowhere. It's like, no, it just means that Photoshop isn't the end all be all number one thing that you should rely on to meet all of your expectations for art. Procreate does a bunch of stuff that Photoshop doesn't do better. And then Clip Studio does a bunch of stuff that neither of them do. And if you're working on like a comic and you're doing inks and things, like Clip Studio is just fast. And the way it vectorizes everything, man, it's great. The vector brushes, it's like filling in areas with just black ink. Ooh, it's so satisfying in Clip. But yeah, enough of me rambling about process. I got inspired to do this owl character based on this concept that I saw a while ago. The concept was of, I think it's like 3 owls. They were like holding swords and robes. It's a pretty cool image. The style's really great. I mean, it's way better than what I'm doing right here. I mean, what I'm doing is way more realistic than what that image was. But I had always kind of thought about that image in the back of my mind, because it kind of touched on a feeling of, it's not too similar to what I was doing with this project called Black Witch, but it's similar enough where it makes me think of that thing again. So that's kind of what this character is to me. It's like, how would I take the parts that I liked about that and bring it over into something like my old Black Witch project, which I would like to get back to in the future. I think that would be really cool, since I already have the majority of that thing mostly done, and in terms of it being written. I just need to kind of iron it out a bit more now that I have a bit more experience working on stuff. But yeah, that was the initial idea for doing this kind of owl character, was thinking of that project again, and what would I do with this style to make something that's kind of semi-real but not exactly real with an animal. Sorry, I'm just kind of focused on these little tiny details. Yeah. You can see that from what I was saying about kind of layering on top of the Clip Studio texture, just how that all works, because it doesn't feel overly sharp anymore in the face. You can still see the sharpness in the chest area where the feathers start to fan out. But as far as like this area of the face, like the cheeks, the eyes, the beak, that whole section, I found that still kind of comes across well. Okay, so what I did there was I duplicated my base clip layer where I did the drawing, and then I merged my paint over that I'd done all in Photoshop with that duplicated clip layer. And then I used the magic wand tool and I selected the white around the character, and I had select all layers applied. I did from the menu, I went to select and I did inverse selection, and then select, modify, contract by 2, and then I turn that layer into a multiply layer. I make a layer beneath. This is all with the selection active. And then I fill it in with this color. And now I'm just kind of erasing out the jagged edges around the selection. And once that's all done, I begin to do my whole kind of fill painting thing beneath the character. So I'm making a new layer beneath that fill. And this is just like a panel selection, basically just a rectangle. And I'm going to select a neutral kind of gray tone and fill it back there so that I'm not just working off of a white canvas, because working off a white canvas will give you different values, different colors. It'll make you think differently about like how you're lighting the character. So I want to make sure that I set the character into a dark space, because I want the actual lighting on this dude to be more dramatic and not like he's just standing in the middle of like a bright white room with light hitting him from all directions. So I'm painting out the edges a bit more of the color beneath my multiply layer. And then once that's all done, I'm just going to begin painting within that fill layer that I have. So that green color that's beneath the character, I'll just hit a command on my keyboard to select that overall fill layer, and then I'll make a new layer, fill that new layer with white, and then I take my multiply layer up top and I merge it with the white layer. So the reason that I do that is because a lot of that value painting that I had done of the owl, it didn't include white because a lot of it was just translucent because it's on its own layer. I didn't paint white into all the areas where there's highlights. A lot of that was the canvas beneath it. So because I'm going to be doing a lot of adjustments in how that multiply layer is colored, and that means like adjusting the white balance and adjusting all the neutral colors and the black tones and all that, because I'm going to be doing that, I want to make sure that white is actually in that multiply layer. So that's why I merge it down with the white fill. So now on the color fill, I have the color fill layer locked, and I am taking my general painter brush and I'm just painting in some warm tones, some yellows, some oranges, just kind of trying to get some neutral colors in there. Ugh, I just burped. Some neutral colors in there to start to flesh out this character's look. I'm really happy with it. I think even at this stage it looks cool. You know, the concept itself isn't anything special. I think that's really the weakest part of it, is I'm looking at it more from like a technical painting demonstration and being like, cool, this came together fast and I like the results. The style feels close to what I'm after. So all of that's really positive to me. Now it's just a matter of doing something that's actually cool. Like if this were some space alien or something like that, even that would have been cooler than this. You know, depending on what you like. So yeah, I work underneath the value multiply layer on this fill layer just to knock in all of my basic colors. So I'll do that for the eyes and the feathers and then the cloak and everything. I'll make, you know, layers that are clipping mask layers to this fill layer, and on those clipping mask layers I'll add in new colors that are like the cloak color. And you know, if I'm doing another painting in this style, I'll do that, and you know, I can do that as much as I want for every individual piece of clothing the character has, or trinkets and things, you know, whatever I want to do. I can separate them all and make sure that each one of them has a decent amount of control to them. So I'm not just kind of like painting everything together. So you'll see when this kind of starts to change when I adjust the value layer. That's the funnest part for me, is doing all the little adjustments to kind of get these nuances of color in there. It's very enjoyable. It's like after doing the whole value painting, I just feel like, oh, I can't wait to get to that phase where I can just start adjusting and see what kind of neat things I can come up with. So there I am, adding some yellow to the eyes. And sorry, my voice is kind of still a little shitty. I am on the other side of COVID, so my throat is still a little shitty. So thank God for this G Fuel. Ugh. My doctor was like, just keep taking G Fuel. Keep doing G Fuel. You'll be fine. So now I'm doing a selective color adjustment to the base colors there. Adjusting the neutral tones. See if I can get something cool. I decided to go with something a bit more gray for the neutrals. And then let's see where I go with the values of white. So I'm going a little bit gray there too. And then I just play with every individual tone. So yellow, red, green, all the different colors. You can use curves for this or whatever you're comfortable with. You don't need to do exactly what I'm doing. So I just made a clipping mask layer for that base. And this is a color balance. So I'm going to see if I can do some adjustments using color balance. Most people hate color balance, by the way. I don't really have a problem with it. But I'm also like a dinosaur sometimes, where I'm just dumb with a lot of that Photoshop stuff. Yep, so there I am painting in some red into the cloak. Yep, now just add in some slight color shifts, some brighter tones, some darker tones. Just trying to reinforce the shadows that are already there in the lighting that I've already established. Then adding in some gold into that little metal piece. Whatever that is. I don't know what it is. Yeah, okay, so now I've created a clipping mask of selective color. It's an adjustment layer on the values on top. So I'm adjusting the black tones and the neutral colors, and you can see how just adjusting those values and having the colors read differently, just how fast it starts to unify the painting. Like, I don't know. It's very fun to do this part. It just feels like the whole piece is coming together really quickly. And a color balance layer, just feeling that out, see if that's something I want to do. Yeah. Yeah, see how quick that came together? Man, it's making me want to do it right now instead of doing this video. I just want to do another painting like this. It's so satisfying. And adding vibrance in there to bump up the values, or not the values, bump up the richness of the colors. So you can see the before and after. It's subtle, but it adds in just enough color for what I'm after. I like it. Okay, so now I've made a soft light layer that's clipping mask to the base fill layer. It's the topmost layer for all those. And I'm choosing a purple, like a dark purple, and I'm using my general painter brush, and I'm just adding in some shadow to the character. And I like the soft light layers for this because when I'm using my general painter brush, it has this nice texture which almost makes it feel like watercolor. And I'm just continually building like texture on top of texture. So I feel like it adds a decent amount of depth to the kind of like richness of that traditional feel. So that's the idea anyway, using the soft light layers. I really like the way that it looks. So you can see it. Yeah, and I'm doing another one. I think this is this is a multiply layer. I'm not sure if I keep the multiply layer in this one. Sometimes I'll do a multiply layer to reinforce shadows, if there's like a drop shadow or something. And it works sometimes it's unnecessary. But I always play with it just to see if, it could use it. Working from a white canvas grayscale painting like this, I find that it helps me working from white because I am thinking of my tones differently. I'm thinking in like a lighter value scale because I'm rendering on white. So when I get to these stages, I find that my painting, it never really reads too dark because of that. Where I feel if I had rendered the whole grayscale painting on like a dark background or something, if I went through this whole process that I've shown you, that by the time I was at this phase and I had the value layer as a multiply layer, because it was multiplied on top of these colors, it would just read very dark. So I think that's an advantage of working the painting up the way I have been working it. So I think I lose the multiply layer. I want to say I just I either turn it way down in opacity or I lose it completely, because I know that I didn't like it. It was a little too much, or maybe I just color adjusted away from that super dark blue tone. Sorry, I keep coughing. Yeah, I do some color adjusting to it. I mean, I really can't get over how much fun this is to do. It really is like so much fun. Like, I'm really just trying to convey to you my whole takeaway from this and detail out the process. But at the same time, I'm just like, I made this video. I could have been doing a painting of a cyclops or something. I'm wearing a bunch of Indian clothes. Yeah, so you can see there I like turned the layers on and off, and I was like, it was cooler before. But you gotta try and experiment with things and see what works. Okay, so I selected my base fill layer by hitting Command, or you can hit Control if you're on Windows, and you hit the little box there, the little layer window box next to your fill. And then using that selection, I created another adjustment layer, so another selective color adjustment layer over top of the whole thing. So now it's just adjusting the owl in, but now I'm adjusting everything. I'm adjusting the multiply value area as well as the base colors, and they're not separate adjustments anymore. So now it's like overall adjustments. And this is kind of the final step before I do any other paintings over top, or, adjustments, detailing things out. I like it. Well, yeah, I think we're getting pretty much to the end of this guy. So the main thing I do after this is just kind of, try and create a little bit of a image, fill in some stuff in the background. So while that's going on, I'm just going to talk to you. Yeah, my plans for the future are to knock out that Final Fantasy VII piece. I'm going to be doing it in this style. I might redo the entirety of Cloud now that I'm working this way, which sounds crazy considering I pretty much painted him up. But I think I moved so far from my initial vision of that piece that version of Cloud just wouldn't work now. Maybe he would, but I just don't like it. Looking at that image now versus what I'm doing here, I'm like, God, I could do a much better job. So that's why I haven't worked on that one in a while. I just feel like it's too much. It would just be too much to kind of solve all of that in color and figure it out. I need to rethink the whole approach and just kind of come at it from this angle and see what I can do. So that's the idea. That's why I haven't worked on it in a while. I was like, it's such an ambitious painting that if I'm not super into it, it's not going to work. So I'm going to come back to it now after I do the final version of the Chrono Trigger, which should be done soon because the Magus is pretty much there. And then I'm going to be doing the Final Fantasy VII, as well as some other stuff that's going to be quicker things like this. And then I'm going to have another video series that I'm thinking will be supplemental to the Q&As. We didn't do a Q&A last month because, number one, it was just a lot going on, but we've been thinking about how to reframe Q&As because we retread territory so much. And the initial thing was to do the PDF breakdown where we just do the whole write-up of it all. So it's documented in one place. Where I'm still going to do that. I literally just haven't had time since, last year. And in the meantime, I want to do almost not frequently asked questions, but I want to do a video series that's kind of covering the why and how of what I've been doing. So you tell me if you like this idea. I was thinking of doing a why concept art type of video, why you should do it, what you can expect to do as far as payments concerned, how you kind of make up a portfolio about it. So it's going to be kind of covering bases of questions I've been asked a bunch of times in just videos that are very specific, targeted videos at industries that I've been a part of, designing toys, doing movie posters, doing concept art for games, concept art for movies, working on comics, publishing a book. All of these things are videos that I could probably do better at with a laser focused video rather than just divided between a whole bunch of Patreon Q&As, where if somebody was looking for that information and they jumped into the Patreon now, they may never find that question that was asked in the middle of a 2-hour video, and they get their answer. So that's kind of the idea, is to is to kind of once and for all encapsulate all of those questions into singular videos, like how and why study fundamentals, and it's things like that. So that's the thought, and I'm thinking that I'll start doing that next, and I'll put up a post for that video series, and it'll just be like a touching base kind of thing. I'll explain in the post, I'll probably make a video explaining it, saying that I need questions that are maybe ones you've heard before, or that you thought were interesting, or maybe that you wanted me to elaborate on. Leave them in the comments, and I'm going to hit all of them in one video that makes sense and kind of covers the broad range, of questions in that same space around one specific kind of genre. Because the amount of questions I get asked just about fundamental studies, or just scheduling, or life balance, all of those things are interesting to me. Like, why freelance? Why studio job? Like, why would you do one over the other? All of those sorts of questions are things that I would like to really target and make sure that they're covered. Because the last thing that I want to do for you is just create Q&A videos that are the same video every single time, which I think is what happened. I just kept making the same video. Then I know for people who've been here a while, they're probably just kind of like, I've heard the answer to this question a lot. I don't need to hear it again. It's fine. So where this guy is at, I am just doing some final adjustments where I'm like filling in the top parts of the head here, because the selection was weird where the lighting was off. So I'm just kind of fixing that. Well, let me skip ahead, because I don't really think anything happens for the rest of this. Okay, yeah, there's just some final adjustments, and they'll show you the last bit that I do. So the last thing I do is I create a new layer. I turn it into an overlay layer. I click the little box that says fill with a neutral 50% gray. Then I go to filter, noise, add noise, uniform, and then whatever percent you like, 25, 50, 60, whatever. And then I blur that by about 1.2 or something. And it just, adds noise to the image. I'll turn that layer down, that fill noise layer, down to about, what did I do, 36%? Doesn't really matter, just whatever looks good. And then that'll be the final thing that I do. And then I flatten the whole thing and save it. Oh yeah, I hope that this was helpful. I appreciate you all sticking with me through this. Apologies for my maybe even lower energy than usual. I'm just, sick kids, sick wife, deadlines and all kinds of craziness. It is what it is. You don't sleep as much, and you just get sick, and you hope things just turn around. So I'm hopeful that everybody's going to be fine and things are going to be good. But yeah, I hope that you're good, and thank you so much for your support. If you're new here, thank you for checking this out. If you've been here for a long time, thank you for sticking with me, and I will talk to you soon. See you later.